Chapter 2. The Price of Retribution. The fire in Loki's sanctuary still burned, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. The scent of Asgardian wine, parchment, and old wood lingered in the air, undisturbed. But the room felt empty, because she was still gone. Loki stood over the bed where the ranger lay, motionless, bathed in firelight. Her breath was steady, but her fingers twitched, ever so slightly, caught in the grip of something beyond reality. A prison of nightmares. A realm of twisted horrors, where Mora had left her to rot. Loki should have felt relief that the sorceress had been dealt with, that the wretched woman had been stripped of everything she once was. But he did not, because the ranger was still trapped, and that was unacceptable. He lowered himself to the edge of the bed, his hand hovering over hers. Her skin was cool, but not cold, not lifeless, but still wrong. Loki closed his eyes. He had already punished the guilty. Now he would reclaim what was his. A descent into shadows. Loki did not bother with subtlety. Mora had woven this nightmare prison, had crafted it specifically to trap the ranger's mind, ensuring that even if her body survived, her soul would be lost forever. But Mora was gone now. Her magic had crumbled the moment Loki had severed her from it, which meant there was nothing left to keep him out. Loki placed a hand on the ranger's forehead, his fingers barely grazing her temples. His eyes flared, raw magic humming beneath his skin. "You are not lost to me," he whispered. And then he followed her in. A mind in ruin. The moment he entered the nightmare realm, Loki understood the cruelty of what had been done to her. It was not simply a dream. It was destruction. The world around him was fractured, twisted reflections of memories and fears, tangled into something grotesque. Fragments of places the ranger had once known floated in the abyss. A battlefield, half consumed by darkness. A forgotten path in the wilderness, trees twisted into hollowed-out carcasses. And above all, the whispers. "You are not alone. You will never wake up. You were abandoned." Loki exhaled slowly. Pathetic. Mora had been skilled, he would grant her that, but she had made one crucial mistake. She had assumed that the ranger was weak, enough to be consumed by this, that she would surrender to it. But the ranger was not weak. And he was here now. He stepped forward, his presence warping the nightmare realm around him. The whispers hissed, recoiling from him, like shadows slithering away from a flame. Loki ignored them. He had no time for their petty illusions. There was only one thing he sought. And then he saw her. The breaking point. She was curled on the ground, wrapped in shadows, her breath shallow. Her eyes were open, but they saw nothing. The nightmare had twisted her mind, so deeply that she could no longer separate the real from the illusion. Loki crouched by her side, his expression unreadable. "Tanya," he murmured. She did not react. Her hands clutched at nothing, fingers grasping at the air like she was trying to hold onto something that was already gone. Loki frowned. He reached forward, but before he could touch her, she flinched. A sharp breath escaped her lips as she scrambled away from him, terror flashing across her face. Loki bent very still. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse, fragile. "No more tricks. No more. I won't believe it. I won't believe it." Loki exhaled slowly. "You think I'm another illusion," he observed. She trembled. "I know you are." His lips curved into something almost sad. "Then allow me to prove you wrong." And without another word, he broke the nightmare apart. The Awakening. The realm collapsed in an instant. The twisted battlefield? Gone. The suffocating shadows? Destroyed. The whispers? Silenced. All that remained was him and her in a vast, endless void. The ranger gasped, blinking as reality shifted around her. "What?" Loki tilted his head. "Do you see clearly now?" Her eyes, sharp, weary, exhausted, locked onto his. "You're real?" A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "That depends," he mused. "Are you still afraid of me?" She stared at him for a long moment. Then, finally, she collapsed into him. Loki barely moved as she pressed her forehead to his chest, her entire form shaking. Not in fear, not in despair, but in relief. A slow breath escaped her. "You found me." Loki allowed his smirk to soften, just slightly. "Of course I did," he murmured. "Did you truly believe I wouldn't?" She let out a quiet, tired laugh against him. "No." Then softer. "I just didn't think I'd ever wake up." Loki's gaze darkened, his hand lifting to tangle in her hair, holding her against him as if anchoring her to the present. "You are awake," he said simply, "and you are safe." And as the last remnants of the nightmare realm vanished, as reality reclaimed them both, Loki knew one thing for certain. He had won, and she would never be lost to him again. The battle that cannot be fought. At first, Loki had thought the worst was over. Mora was gone, stripped of her power, cast into a life where she would never again wield deception as a weapon. The Ranger was back, her body whole, her presence tangible once more. The nightmare realm no longer held her captive. And yet, it had not released her, not fully. It was subtle at first. She laughed when she was expected to, spoke as she always had, moved with the same quiet grace she had before. But Loki saw it. The way she hesitated before sleep, the way exhaustion began to take root in the corners of her eyes, the way she would startle at the edge of waking, her breath shallow, fingers twitching, as if grasping for something unseen. She did not speak of it. And that was how he knew it was worse than she let on. The Ranger was strong, fiercely so, but even the strongest warriors could be broken in ways that left no visible wounds. And Loki had seen this before. He had seen it in the warriors of Asgard, returning from battles no one should have ever survived. He had seen it in the refugees of realms left in ruins, their eyes hollow, their minds still trapped in the war long since over. And if he was honest, he had seen it in himself. And that was what unsettled him most. He knew what it was to carry wounds unseen, to bear scars that did not fade. He knew the weight of pretending, to be whole while the war raged just beneath the surface. And that was what she was doing. The slow unraveling. At first he let her keep her walls. She did not want his interference, not yet, and Loki understood the value of patience. He would not push, not immediately. But the signs became impossible to ignore. She was exhausted. She would stay up long past reason, the candlelight flickering against the walls of his sanctuary, as she stared at books she was not reading. When she did sleep, it was restless, short, fitful moments stolen before she started awake, breath sharp, hands clutching the blankets as if expecting them to disappear. And then came the fear. Not fear of him, not fear of anything real, but fear of the moment she closed her eyes. Loki has watched her face monsters without flinching, had seen her stand against Mora's magic with unwavering resolve. But this, she could not fight this. And it was destroying her. The breaking point. It was late when Loki finally confronted her. The fire burned low, casting the room in warm golden light. Outside, the sound of the waterfall was steady, soothing, one of the few constants in a place of ever-shifting magic. She sat curled in a chair near the hearth, her body tense despite the illusion of ease. A book rested in her lap, open but unread. Her eyes were distant, unfocused, trapped somewhere Loki could not follow. And he had enough. Without a word, he stepped forward, plucking the book from her hands and snapping it shut. She blinked at him in surprise. "You are not reading," he said simply, setting the book aside. "You are distracting yourself." Her expression shifted, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. "I don't know what you're talking about." He gave her a look, one that dared her to lie to him. She sighed, leaning back in the chair, rubbing a hand over her face. "I'm fine, Loki." "No, you are not." A beat of silence. She exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "I just need time." Loki's jaw tightened. Time will not mend the wound you refuse to acknowledge, Tanya. Her eyes snapped to his at the name. He only ever called her that when it mattered. She looked away first. "You wouldn't understand." Loki laughed, a quiet, bitter sound. "Oh, I assure you, I understand better than most." She frowned at him. "Do you?" He stepped closer, placing a hand on the arm of her chair, leaning down just enough to hold her gaze. "I know what it is to fear sleep, to fear what waits on the other side of it." Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Understanding. But still she shook her head. "It's not the same." "No," Loki agreed softly. "It never is. But it does not make it any less real." She swallowed hard. "It's just dreams. They are not real." "No," he mused. "Then why do they still have a hold on you?" She had no answer. Not one she was willing to give. Loki straightened, considering her for a long moment before he spoke again. "You do not trust sleep. You do not trust that you will wake from it." She stiffened. "That's not. You do not have to lie to me, Tanya." His voice was gentle, but firm. "I see you, and I'm telling you now, you are safe." She let out a quiet breath. "I know that." "Then believe it." Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, she whispered, "I don't know how." Loki did not hesitate. He extended a hand, palm open, steady. "Then let me show you." She hesitated, staring at it. A choice. To continue pretending she could fight this alone. Or to trust him. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. And Loki pulled her to her feet. "Come," he murmured. "You will sleep tonight." Her fingers tightened slightly around his. "And if the nightmares return?" Loki's expression softened. "Then I will be here when you wake." And for the first time since she had escaped the nightmare realm, she believed him. The long road to healing. Loki led her toward the alcove where the bed lay, the fire casting soft golden light over the sanctuary. The ranger followed, but there was a tension in every step, a subtle stiffness in her fingers where they still rested in his palm. Loki said nothing as he sat on the edge of the bed, his grip steady, his touch a quiet reassurance. She did not let go of his hand. Not yet. Her gaze flickered to the blankets, to the inviting warmth of the space, and then to the shadows at the edges of the room. The place where nightmares waited. Loki felt the hesitation in her breath. He had expected this. "Tanya," he said softly. Her eyes lifted to his, and even now, with all the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders, she responded to the sound of her name from his lips. He could not command her to sleep. He could weave a spell so delicate that she would drift into a slumber before she even knew it had happened. He could lock her mind into peace, push the nightmares back into oblivion, shield her from their grasp. But it would not last. That was the mistake of so many before him, believing that healing was something that could be forced. Loki knew better. "You are afraid," he said, voice even, calm. Not of sleep itself, but of what awaits inside it. Her fingers twitched slightly in his grasp. "I don't want to close my eyes." Loki nodded, as if they were simply discussing strategies, as if this were not a battle already being fought in the depth of her mind. "Then don't." She blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Stay awake," he said smoothly. "Fight it if you must, but I will remain here with you." A flicker of something crossed her face. "You'll just sit here?" Loki smirked. "I have endured far worse company than yours, my dear." A breath of a laugh escaped her, soft, almost imperceivable, but there. That was what he needed, a sliver of something real. "Lie down," Loki continued, adjusting slightly so that she had space to rest beside him. "Rest your body, if nothing else." She hesitated, but only for a moment. Then slowly, carefully, she settled down, her back to him, her body rigid beneath the blankets. Loki did not move at first. He simply sat there, present, unwavering. Minutes passed. Her breathing remained shallow. The stiffness in her frame did not ease. "You do not trust this," he observed quietly. "I trust you," she corrected. But there was something strained beneath the words. Loki tilted his head slightly. "Then why do you lie there as if waiting for the world to collapse?" She exhaled slowly. "Because it always does." Loki's gaze softened. He had thought the same thing so many times. The breaking of walls. "Come here," Loki murmured. She hesitated. "What?" "Turn around," he said, his voice gentle, patient. "Face me." For a long moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, reluctantly, she rolled onto her side, facing him. Loki was watching her, intently. But there was no expectation in his gaze, no force, no command. Just understanding. She had seen him in many forms, charming, mischievous, dangerous. But this Loki, the one who waited, who offered his presence without condition, was something different. He lifted a hand, giving her space to pull away if she wished, but she did not. His fingers traced a slow, careful path along her temple. A whisper of contact. "You are not alone in this," he murmured. A breath hitched in her throat. And then she let her forehead rest against his. She did not speak, did not move, just breathe. Loki closed his eyes, his voice no more than a whisper against her skin. "I will not let them take you again." The shudder in her breath was almost imperceivable. But this time, when she closed her eyes, she did not open them again so quickly. And Loki did not let go. The road ahead. She would still wake in the night. She would still struggle. Loki knew this, but tonight, for the first time, she did not wake alone. And that, he decided, was the first victory in a battle that would be fought together. The strength in scars. The days passed and the shadows did not vanish. They clung to the edges of the ranger's mind, lurking just beyond reach, whispering when sleep threatened to take her. But she did not surrender to them, not fully. Because every night Loki was there. At first it had been the small things. Sitting in the same room while she forced herself to rest. A steady, silent presence she could reach for if she dared. She had not dared. Not immediately. But he had waited. And one night, as exhaustion crept deeper into her bones, as the weight of sleeplessness bore down on her, she had turned toward him, just slightly, just enough that he knew. And he had understood. He had laid beside her, not touching, not pressing, but there, close enough that when sleep came, she did not wake in terror. Close enough that, when she woke with a sharp inhale, fingers trembling, she found herself anchored by his presence. And he had simply stayed. The test of trust. It did not happen all at once. Healing never did. But something had shifted. The ranger still feared the moment of closing her eyes, but she no longer feared waking up alone. And so, one night she made a choice. As they sat by the fires, the embers casting soft flickering shadows along the stone walls, she let out a slow breath and turned to him. Loki. He looked up, his sharp eyes catching every detail. The way her hands curled slightly, as if bracing herself. The way she held herself rigid, a soldier preparing for battle. "What is it?" he asked, voice calm, steady. She hesitated. Then, "I want to try." Loki did not ask what she meant. He already knew. His gaze softened, though his expression did not change. "Then come." She let out a breath, as if relieved that he would not make her explain the battle she was about to fight. She stood, moving forward to the alcove where the bed awaited. Loki followed. A new kind of strength. When she settled into the blankets, she still held herself stiffly, but this time she turned toward him first. Loki watched her carefully, waiting. She met his gaze, and for the first time since she had escaped Mora's prison, there was something resolute in her eyes. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Determination. She would not be ruled by this. She had endured worse. She had survived. "I won't break," she whispered. Loki's lips curved just slightly. "No, you won't." She hesitated just a moment before shifting closer, not quite touching, but closer. Loki said nothing. He simply lifted an arm in silent invitation. And after another heartbeat of hesitation, she took it. She let herself rest against him, her cheek just barely pressing to his chest. Loki remained still, but his arms curled securely around her. A shield. An anchor. She let out a slow, deep breath, and then, for the first time in weeks, she slept. Not out of exhaustion, not because sleep had finally overpowered her, but because she had chosen to. And when the nightmares came, as they always did, Loki was there. His warmth, his steady breathing, the quiet, reassuring weight of his presence. She did not wake in terror. She did not wake alone. She woke to the sound of his voice, low and calm, murmuring her name in the quiet dark, and she knew she had survived. She would heal, and she would never have to do it alone. The path forward. There would still be bad nights. There would still be moments when the shadows whispered louder than reason, when fear tried to sink its claws into her ribs. But now she had him, and that was enough, for now, for always. The strength to stand again. The night slowly became easier, not effortless, never that, but easier. Sleep no longer felt like a battle she was destined to lose. It was a battlefield, yes, but one where she had finally found her footing. She was learning, not just to endure, but to fight back. And Loki? Loki was always there. He did not coddle her. He did not try to fix what had been broken with mere words. He knew that healing was not something that could be gifted. It had to be claimed. And so he did what no one else had ever done for him. He waited. He did not rush her, he did not pry. He was simply present, a steady, unshakable force at her side, ready to catch her if she stumbled, but never once taking away her right to stand on her own. And she did stand. The first time she fell asleep without hesitation, he noticed. The first time she woke without panic, he noticed. The first time she fell into step beside him without that hidden tension in her shoulders, he noticed. And when she smiled, a real, unburdened smile, he noticed that most of all. The morning that changed everything. The fire had burned low, the sky beyond the windows shifting into the soft blue of early dawn. Loki stirred, barely opening his eyes. He had woken countless times over the past weeks to the absence of her. The quiet way she would slip out of bed after another restless night. The silent war she fought within herself when she thought he wasn't looking. But this morning, she was still there. Still curled close, her breath steady, her form relaxed. Loki watched her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. This was new. She had let herself stay. He did not move, did not stir, did not do a single thing that might wake her before she was ready. And when she did wake, blinking blearily, shifting slightly against him, she did not startle, she did not pull away. She simply breathed in deeply, stretching a little, and stayed. Her gaze lifted to his, still half lidded with sleep. Loki arched an eyebrow. Comfortable? She made a sleepy, amused sound, her lips twitching into a smirk. Surprisingly so. His own smirk flickered into place. A miracle truly. A soft huff of laughter. It was a small thing, but it mattered. It was proof that she was coming back to herself. Loki tilted his head. What now, then? She considered for a moment, then, with quiet certainty, breakfast. Loki barked a laugh, shaking his head. Well, if that isn't a sign of recovery, then I don't know what is. The path to something more. She was healing. There would still be nights where shadows clawed at the edges of her mind. There would still be moments when doubt whispering cruel things in her ear. But she was healing, because she knew. She was not alone. And Loki would always be there, not as her savior, not as her shield, but as her equal, her anchor, her everything. And for the first time since she had been trapped in that nightmare, she allowed herself to believe that she would be whole again. And that was enough, for now. for always.